I'd like to welcome everybody this morning to Brady Ware's 5th annual Take 5 Not-for-Profit Conference. At Brady Ware, we take a lot of pride in serving our communities and helping the organizations within our communities serve our communities. Today's event is an example of the things we do that we hopefully make a difference, and we hopefully make a difference to your organizations. We're quite pleased to be able to bring an event like today. We hope it provides great value to you as you go back and operate your missions. Brady Ware has over 100 mission-based companies, which I think is a surprising number. But we really do commit to this sector. It's valuable to us. We service you in accounting ways, in auditing ways, in tax ways, but more importantly, we hope to provide strategic value in a consulting capacity as you come up with plans to meet, achieve, and succeed in your organization's goals and missions. And with that, I'd just like to thank you for coming today. I'd like to introduce Bob Reynolds. Bob Reynolds is Brady Ware's practice leader for the not-for-profit practice, and Bob's going to get the event started for this morning.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Good morning.
Good morning.
Are we awake? I should say cold morning, right? I do believe we passed fall and just gone from summer to winter. That's why. Well, as Brian said, we're delighted that you are joining us today. Brady Ware has a long-standing tradition of providing service, not only professionally, but from a volunteer perspective, to a number of organizations in the markets that are, frankly, privileged to make a living. We believe in service. We believe in creating value. And the reason we sort of branded and took off with this Take 5 concept is we really want all of you today to take 5, step away from the day-to-day operational things, and let's talk about subject matter that's more strategic in nature. You'll find that in our keynote speaker's presentation. You'll find that in our breakout sessions. And then for those of you who are going to stay through lunch, and at lunch we have Paul Helfrich who will join us to share really what is a remarkable story about collaboration with respect to the creation of that Katy Performing Arts Alliance and what it took to make that happen. In the spirit of collaboration, well, I'm sorry, Kara, don't dock me for this. I got to do the housekeeping stuff first. I totally flew past that. The restrooms are over here. You can exit through that door. However, they take a power cord across the doorway, so please be careful. And right now, I think there's a pool going on, whether or not if I go out that door, I'll actually fall into that one. You too. So, but anyway, please be careful. If you need anything at all today, just ask one of our Brady Ware teammates. And now I'm going to make them all stand up. That aggravates them. So let's go, folks. This group is here today for you. So, if you need an extra copy of a handout, or if you need an information, need to know where phones are, anything of that nature, please just ask one of our associates. Since she just walked in the room, she's talking. I would like to introduce Kara Hamilton, because as I always say, I get the easy job, so does our conference team. We get to do the grooming, Kara does all the work. So please thank Kara. All right, back on script. We've done a lot at these conferences to talk about strategic alliances, collaborations. How can we all work better together to serve those that are in need in our communities? The world has changed, and to be brutally honest, we've responded slowly. We have a tendency to look inside our organization. We're concentrating on our mission, trying to all figure out where the next dollar is going to come from. And we are convinced, and we're seeing more and more of it, that the model of the traditional nonprofit is going to have to change. If you look at the political agenda, the priorities in the country, they're cutting money for social service at a time when the need is increasing exponentially. So it's a perfect storm. So we have to find ways to leverage one another's talent for the greater good. So our rally cry is, it's no longer about my mission, it's about our mission. And in the words of Gandhi, we have to be the change we expect to see in the world. It's just that simple. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about ways that we can work differently, ways that we can be more strategic, ways that we can work together. And in the spirit of collaboration, for the first time at this conference, we have invited a local organization that we partner with to participate in today's program. And I'm going to introduce, and we'll ask her to stand, Jenny Warner. Come on, I know. Jenny leads the Miami Valley Nonprofit Collaborative. And if you don't know about the collaborative, you need to. Their mission really is to make connections, to provide peer-on-peer opportunities for you guys to work together, share your knowledge. They've engaged their programming partners, and we're very proud to be one of them, to bring professional expertise together to provide training, both in operational and strategic areas, for nonprofit organizations at, quite frankly, an incredibly low cost. Maybe they're a diamond in the rough, maybe they're the best kept secret in Miami Valley, but I would encourage you strongly to take advantage of their services. Jenny herself has dedicated her career to nonprofit administration and organizational development. Her experience includes human resource management, training, and leadership development, career coaching, nonprofit community development, and program management in both the nonprofit and for-profit sectors. Her passion is serving as the founder and volunteer coordinator for the collaborative. They're a network of organizations, as I said, that provide affordable, accessible resources and training to support the local nonprofit sector. She's on the board of the Life Enrichment Center. And for those that don't know, the Life Enrichment Center has completely remodeled the top floor in their building. And they have incredible space that can be used for board retreats, training programs. It's tech ready, so it has all the microphones, projectors, and everything. And again, that is a resource that you can use, and it is incredibly affordable. Jenny has held leadership positions in several local organizations, including the Christian Life Center, People Working Collaboratively, the Widows Home at Dayton, and the YMCA. She serves on the board currently for the Life Enrichment Center, the Community Council of Wright State's Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, another program partner of the collaborative, and as a big sister for Big Brothers Big Sisters. So that's Jenny Warner, and she will be doing a breakout session later this morning on organizational development, and I'm going to ask Jenny to come up and tell you a little bit more about the collaborative.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that very nice introduction. I wasn't expecting all that. I see a lot of faces that I recognize and have gotten to know through the nonprofit community. Gosh, programs, other agencies we've partnered with, those who have participated in the nonprofit collaborative program. So this is kind of like a reunion sort of day or something. This is really fun. Glad everyone was able to make it today. This is an amazing event that Brady Ware puts on every year. I can't remember now how many years this has gone on. This is my first opportunity to have gotten here, so thrilled to be here. The generosity of Brady Ware for our nonprofit community really is astounding. Again, as Bob said, they're not only a sponsor for the Nonprofit Collaborative, but they're a program partner. So they're coming and providing programs for our nonprofit community as well. We'll talk a little bit more about those later today. But again, the Nonprofit Collaborative is a collaborative of partners. We were looking to basically build a trade or a professional association for nonprofits. We really felt like nonprofit professionals just in general didn't have the opportunity to come together to network and share best practices, attend trainings. I have a background in HR and leadership development. I really felt that leadership development was an area that nonprofits just didn't have access, to. It's not affordable in our very tight budgets already. Not that our agencies don't want to invest in developing leadership skills for our professionals, there just aren't the resources available. So that's really a passion of mine and shared by our program partners. We have Susan. Susan, if you'll wave. Susan is the nonprofit librarian at the Dayton Metro Library. The Metro Library is one of our program partners. Christy Mauk is in the back. Christy with the Better Business Bureau. That is one of our partners as well that made the collaborative possible. I don't know if we have anyone from Right Stage. I haven't seen anyone. Good morning.
Mary Jean. Hello.
I'm sorry.
Mary Jean Henry with the Advancement
Mary Jean,
Office.
yes, from the Advancement Office. Yeah. So the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance is a program at Right Stage that certifies students to be prepared to work in nonprofits. So they've been a program partner of ours as well. They are preparing the students who are coming out and working in our nonprofits. Do we have any alumni here this morning of NLA? Okay. So there are a lot of nonprofit professionals that have come out of Great State that are supporting us. SCORE, I didn't see anyone from SCORE here this morning. SCORE is, yes? From the Dayton SCORE. From the Dayton SCORE, wonderful, okay, yes. So SCORE also provides resources to nonprofits, amazing workshops if you haven't attended those. So a few years ago, we all came together and said, how do we do this together? Provide the kinds of programs, networking events, training events, leadership development that nonprofits need, but how do we do it affordably and right here locally, accessibly? So we were able to do this all through collaboration. It really is a unique kind of approach. Not one of us is really taking on, all of the work and such. We do it together. So thrilled to be here. There are some flyers and business cards for the Nonprofit Collaborative out on the table. If you haven't connected with us, we post all of our events as well as events and other affordable offerings that we find out about going on in the community that the Better Business Bureau is offering, the library is offering, SCORE is offering, as well as others. That's all on our Facebook page, so you can like and follow our Facebook page. We also have a website. We're about to launch a new website, so in the next couple of days, you'll see a brand new look out there too. So pick up a business card and some flyers of upcoming events, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Jen. All right, now I have the pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Jenifer Holland. Jenifer is the Senior Director of Programs and Consulting. She directs BoardSource. How many folks know who BoardSource is? Aren't they great? A round of applause for BoardSource. I think. Jenifer directs BoardSource's consulting practice and helps lead the organization's research to practice and sector leadership initiatives. In addition to supporting BoardSource's governance, knowledge creation, and management, she is active in career development for social sector professionals as a mentor and a peer. Jenifer joined BoardSource as a governance consultant in 2012 and has over 20 years, although you don't look old enough, 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Prior to joining BoardSource, Jenifer served as program manager for training and technical assistance at the Finance Project, where she delivered financing and sustainability training and planning and technical assistance to groups nationwide. Jenifer is also a founding executive director of ACE, the Alliance for Community Enhancement at Columbia University. which was formed to collaborate with 501c3 organizations in Harlem, in New York City. So please join me in welcoming Jenifer, and I hope you enjoy your day.
Good morning, everybody. Bear with me a moment. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Because sometimes our friends, but not always our friends. Okay, I might ask some of my colleagues up front to help me with this so that I can speak with you. Because I don't seem to have success. It is on. I know I'm doing that part right. Has anybody else ever had tech issues before? Please tell me. All right. I'm going to ask if I can get some assistance so that I can greet you properly and get us rolling, because I know your time is precious and you have really carved out time away from your businesses, your homes, your families, your children, your pets, folks that you love and care about. There's about a million other things you could be doing today. And so we just want to be able to go back to the first slide, which is probably 2 slides back. Thank you, I appreciate it. And so I want to really be able to honor your time. And I'm incredibly grateful to Brady Ware for inviting us to be here. I do represent BoardSource, so I bring you great greetings from us here. Based in Washington, D.C., but we do our work nationally, and in fact, you may see some of my colleagues or some of the representatives of our consulting practice in your communities over the years. So with that, I will share with you a few items that I have really reflected on and that pair in nicely with Bob's opening remarks today. I flew here yesterday in a Boeing 737. It's a plane that makes up over 25% of the worldwide large commercial airliner fleet. There are approximately, 357,000 parts on this type of plane. And there are 600,000 bolts and rivets that fasten these parts together. Why am I telling you all this? I have a vivid imagination, and I used to be admittedly frightened to think about the guts and the nitty-gritty of what was going on with the planes that I flew in. Those wiring, electrical systems, I did not want to think about any of those things that were keeping my life and limb together 30,000 feet in the air, but I'm not anymore. Why is that? Because of my husband, who we've been staring at for a moment here. This is Nate. He comes from a long line of performing musicians. His father played viola for the Pittsburgh Symphony. His uncle played oboe for the Baltimore Symphony. And his mother, my mother-in-law, was the first woman to play in the U.S. Air Force Strolling Strings. He obviously plays the tuba, an instrument with a completely different reputation than the strings or the woodwinds. As comedian Drew Carey once said, "Welcome to the tuba section, where nothing is taken seriously and all you need to know is how to play the Jaws theme." Given his family history, you might think that Nate was destined to pursue a career in music, and you'd be right. He taught elementary school band and strings in rural Maryland for over 20 years. For a long time, he had the coveted position of teaching 4th and 5th graders at a single school, not splitting his time across multiple campuses like many performing arts teachers. He had a great principal, his classes were full, and through careful budgeting, he was able to build up an instrument lending library for students that needed them, and a sheet music library beyond compare. But then things changed. In 2015, $68 million in dedicated school funding was held back in the state of Maryland. Nate's position at his elementary school was reduced from 65% time down to 40% time, and he had additional classroom duties beyond teaching music, his passion. That principal that he had the great working relationship with, she moved on, and her successor did not have the same vision for the performing arts in the school. I knew that Nate was done with teaching when he came home one day and told me that he was no longer his biggest limiting factor in his success in teaching youth and children at his school and his own success. Now the limiting factors were piling on fast and furious, and he felt that he could not serve his kids or his craft to his standards anymore. Nate resigned. It's a sad story. But it's also a story of hope and resilience. In middle age, Nate rekindled his love of all things aviation and went back to school to become an airplane mechanic. He spent 2.5 years retraining, years that were marked by cold classes taught in airplane hangars, being twice as old as any other student in the room, and facing a battery of FAA tests that would rival any lawyer's bar exams. And yes, I know that these tests are in fact part of what give me a greater level of comfort being in the air these days. He loves his new line of work. And now, instead of teaching music, he's back to playing music in a brass quintet. I share this story because, like Nate's elementary school environment, the world changes around us every day. Repeatedly and sometimes rapidly. The questions on the table for us as nonprofit leaders are we aware of the changes affecting us? And what are we going to do about it? On that note, I'd like to offer just 3 reflections this morning on the nature of change. The first is change is a fact of life. If there's one thing we know for sure, it's that change is a fact of life. Promotions and downsizing, unions and separations, births and deaths all come and go. But how we view change is not static. We have choices about how we interact with the changes that affect us every day. Some of us embrace change. We love the thrill that we get from visiting a new city, trying new food, or adopting the latest technology. Others of us view change with skepticism. Why fix what's not broken? If we let go of the old and the familiar, what will take its place? What assurances do we have that new strategies, new relationships, or new approaches will be effective? But at the same time, don't our missions deserve our full commitment, even if that means taking risks? Even if that means doing the hard work of constantly scanning our environment for changes that affect our missions? Because change is a fact of life. And not only is change a fact of life, the pace of change in the nonprofit sector seems to be moving faster than ever. Just as sand dunes are remodeled and remolded and reshaped by wind and the elements, nonprofits are subject to a mix of forces that regularly affect their operating environment. I don't have to tell you this. Some of these forces are heartening. The nonprofit sector is growing. According to the Urban Institute, an estimated 14.4 million people, or over 1 in 10 employees in the United States, are employed by a nonprofit. And despite the shocks of the recent recession, the nonprofit sector grew proportionally faster than the government and business sectors from 2007 to 2010. What's more, the nonprofit sector makes up 5.4% of our gross domestic product, meaning that it has an increasingly large impact on our national economy, as well as our local communities. Also, volunteerism among young people is up. The volunteer rates of teenagers ages 16 to 19 were quite low in 1974 and 1989, but they more than doubled between 1989 and 2005 to a rate that exceeds the national volunteer rate, which was 27% in 2005. Finally, what we know from our friends at Giving USA is that giving by individuals, foundations, and corporations is up. The most recent data that they have state that the $390.05 billion given in 2016, in all 3 of those categories, it was an uptick of at least 3.5% over 2015 levels. On the other hand, some of these forces are cause for concern. The future of government funding in some areas is uncertain, and moreover, some kinds of charities rely more on government funding than others. According to the most recent edition of the Nonprofit Almanac, in 2013, total funding from government, including local, state, federal sources, accounted for nearly 1/3 of public charities revenue, with grants making up 8% and fees amounting to 24.5%. But the disaggregated data tell a fuller story, highlighting which sectors most rely on government funding and should be most concerned about potential reduction. Human service public charities, for instance, claim the highest proportion of funds from government, a total of 47%, followed by health at 37.4%. This is combined from government grants and also fees. In the case of health, that includes Medicare and Medicaid payments. Nonprofits within the arts, culture, and humanities subsector, on the other hand, have a different challenge to consider. While only 11% of their revenue was from government sources, they received the largest share of their revenue, nearly 44%, from private contributions. We all have a job to do when it comes to monitoring our dependency on any one funding source. What forces are most deeply affecting your operating environment? More importantly, what strategies have you made a part of your routine daily business operations at the staff level, at the board level, through your stakeholder networks, to ensure that you have your finger on the pulse of the trends that most impact the core purposes for which your nonprofit was founded? The nonprofits in this room serve incredibly important core purposes as just a small slice of the tremendously good work that I know you all are doing, and we heard many of those things shared from Jenny just now for the organizations that are represented in the room. Here's a small sample of the mission, vision, and core purposes that are represented here today. Mix of mission and vision statements. To promote the general welfare of women and children in education, health, parenting skills, leadership development, and relationship building that help strengthen the bond between mothers and their children. Enriching the lives of children in need. Secure and distribute school supplies at no cost to teachers of students in need. Working together for Ohio farmers to advance agriculture and strengthen our communities. Enhancing the quality of life for children and adults with disabilities or other special needs. And finally, we are committed to revolutionizing lives where people live, learn, play, and worship. And I hope to get to know more of your mission and vision statements as we spend the rest of the day together today. It is for these reasons and for the many other core purposes that each of you represent that we must address change as a fact of life. For the children, farmers, students, cherished pets, veterans, and many others that we serve. My second reflection about change is that it may involve recognizing some hard truths. Just as Nate had to reckon with the fact that his teaching environment had fundamentally changed, we may also find ourselves staring into the face of an uncomfortable reality. We might face truths about our competitive advantage, truths about our funding mix, truths about the future viability of our programming, or other factors. When that happens, the choice is ours. Do we operate according to the status quo, hoping that the change will fade away, or do we address the change head on? Public-private ventures chose the latter. Based primarily in Philadelphia and New York, Public-Private Ventures, also known as PPV, was a program, research, and evaluation intermediary working with organizations serving disadvantaged youth nationwide. Full disclosure, I actually worked with PPV's workforce development arm over 15 years ago. One of PPV's landmark studies was the 1995 report, Making a Difference, which proved that Big Brothers Big Sisters high-quality mentoring has tangible and significant effects on the lives of youth. A comparison study of 1,000 10 to 16-year-olds who applied to BBVS for mentors revealed astounding results for those that were matched as opposed to those that stayed on waiting lists. After 18 months, those that met on average weekly with mentors had reduced first-time drug use by almost half, reduced first-time alcohol use by a third, cut school absenteeism by half, improved parental and peer relationships, and showed improved confidence in doing their schoolwork. As you can imagine, this study was groundbreaking for BBCPS. And it would not be available to the public today if it weren't for the hard truths that PPV leaders acknowledged. there was no longer a viable funding landscape for PPV's particular blend of research and evaluation expertise. In 2012, PPV's leaders made the difficult decision to dissolve the organization. But they did not let corporate structure or organizational status obscure their relentless focus on the core purposes for which they were founded in the first place. PPV's mission was to improve the effectiveness of policies, programs, and community initiatives, especially as they affect vulnerable communities. PPV's legacy lives on because in conjunction with their dissolution, they found a way for all of their resources and research to live on through a key partner. The Foundation Center's Issue Lab, which is a free searchable database of social sector research. I commend it to you if it's not already on your radar screen. Facing hard truths spurred PPV's leaders to transfer their intellectual assets to another nonprofit partner who acquired them. This is leadership under challenging circumstances. This is what it looks like when leaders keep a laser-like focus on core purposes, regardless of organizational boundaries. And it all began with a question. I'll be honest, I don't know exactly which questions PPV's leaders were discussing during that period of dissolution. They didn't invite me to the boardroom that day. But I do know those questions were focused, relentless, and honest, and perhaps even a little bit scary. Courageous decisions demand nothing less. What I imagine is that PPV's then president and her board of directors asked themselves questions like these. What is our core purpose? What problem are we trying to solve, or what new reality are we trying to create? Is this core purpose still relevant in our current environment? What's our unique value? Are there things that we are doing that no one else is doing or doing as well? If we were to close down, what needs or gaps would be created, and which colleague organizations would be best positioned to fill those gaps? I often say in the course of consulting with nonprofit boards that one of the best gifts a board member can give to an organization is a rich question. And in all honesty, I believe that maxim holds true for a wide variety of nonprofit roles. Indulge me for a moment. Please raise your hand if you are a CEO, executive director, or president of your organization. Excellent. Nonprofit board member? So pleased to see the hands. Senior staff or program staff of a nonprofit? Many people may play multiple roles. Great. Consultants? Anyone that I miss? Okay. Each of you in your individual roles are leaders and champions for important social sector work. And each of you has the power to ask what author and journalist Warren Berger calls a more beautiful question, is a book of the same name. In this book, Berger quotes Dan Rothstein of the Right Question Institute, which is a nonprofit focused on teaching the skill of question asking. People think of questioning as simple, Rothstein says, but when done right, it's a very sophisticated, high-level form of thinking. It is also egalitarian. You do not have to hold a position of authority to ask a powerful question. In some ways, it can be more difficult or risky for those in authority to ask a question. What might be possible if we gave voice to our questions more often? How might that affect the impact of our work? Those of us in this room may not be facing a critical moment like Public-Private Ventures was in closing its doors. I hope not. But there may be a range of other possibilities that our questions can help bring into being. Which brings me to my last observation about change. Change can offer possibilities. PPV found a partner in the Foundation Center's Issue Lab that was positioned to acquire and disseminate their work. What might be possible for your organization with some new or different thinking about partnerships? We began this discussion this morning considering a series of changes in the nonprofit environment, funding, volunteerism, the growth of the sector. But I'd like to call our attention to another trend that's gaining traction: the importance of collaboration. Just 2 years ago, Ford Foundation President Darren Walker said this: while the Ford Foundation has long been calling what he calls the 3 I's, groundbreaking ideas, leading individuals, and institutions and networks, It is now specifically leaning into the importance of institutions and networks. He goes on to say, networks are fulcrums for creativity and dissent, beacons of stability, scaffolding for aspiring change makers, and connectors for social innovators. Stanford's Social Innovation Review put it more simply, survival of the fittest is out, survival of the connected is in. Finally, Art Taylor, President and CEO of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance, offered this take. Historically, nonprofits have used collaboration to keep sinking organizations afloat. What if, instead, nonprofits operated from a position of abundance? The notion that working together can achieve more than working alone? In these times of wide-scale disruption, the pace of change mandates that organizations more quickly maximize the potential of existing programs and operating models. At the same time, they should seek to generate new value from a continuing flow of fresh ideas. In the spirit of Art Taylor's comments, we at BoardSource launched the Power of Possibilities campaign together with partners earlier this year. This campaign is a partnership with experts in the field of strategic alliances and restructuring, and I promise I will define my terms there. Groups like Bridgespan, La Piana, Propel Nonprofits, Lodestar Foundation, Patterson Foundation, and the Lyda Hill Foundation. The Power of Possibility seeks to create new entry points for board-level conversations about the potential for transformative change through partnership. We heard one such story in PPV's Enduring Legacy by partnering with the Foundation Center's Innovation Lab when closing its doors, but there are other critical entry points as well. The campaign offers a set of free downloadable tools, including worksheets, case studies, discussion guides, you actually have 2 of those available at your seats, and editable PowerPoint presentations around a series of key moments or inflection points in the life of a nonprofit. Together, we've explored closing the doors already. I'm certain you're probably ready to move on from that key moment. But the other key moments include strategy and planning, the constant scan of your environment that may lead to innovative partnership opportunities, adapting to change, such as key funding shifts, executive transitions, whether planned or an unplanned departure, innovation and scale, including seizing opportunities to serve more individuals or individuals over a wider geographic area. Starting a nonprofit, which may lead to an incorporated 501c3 or 4 or 6 entity, or might instead lead to a fiscal sponsor arrangement in which your core purposes may be carried out as a project or an entity under another organization's umbrella. Some of the case studies that are hosted by the campaign showcase partnerships that were serendipitous. Like the board chairs of 2 women's organizations in Boston, who discovered that they were both courting the same candidate to assume executive leadership of their organizations after bumping into one another on an elevator. Rather than staying in their own programmatic lanes and competing for the same leader, they realized that this could be a huge opportunity to come together as one organization with the resources and leadership they needed to do deeper, more transformative work. The new merged organization, Empath, is benefiting from valuable economies of scale and a new programmatic model that has gone beyond supporting women in moments of need to creating pathways out of poverty that are truly life-changing. But the opportunities in the campaign are not exclusive to mergers, which David LaPiana, whose collaborative map you see here, calls the biggest gun in the partnership arsenal. There are a whole host of other ways that nonprofits can and do collaborate every day. Your organization may already be engaged in one or more of these. The opportunities highlighted in the Power of Possibility campaign focus on the opportunities in the green and dark purple portions of this map, which really serve to capture the long-term durable partnerships that tend to be more formal and more structured and may indeed involve a legal change in some cases. The sustained nature of these partnerships, together with their deep intentionality, offers tremendous opportunities for impact. One of those opportunities includes joint programming. which the campaign highlights in a case study about innovation and scale. The story of the Youth Services Network involves not one, not two, but 12 organizations serving homeless youth in the Twin Cities. They came together through a joint program to create a new smartphone app that would enable homeless youth to find an available bed at one of their shelters. This innovation would have been ineffective and out of reach for any one of the organizations to do on its own. But together, the Youth Services Network members were able to solve a huge community-wide challenge that was leaving youth on the streets. Finally, closer to home, right here in Dayton, you have a tremendous story of adapting to change in the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance. It's a story that is likely well known to many of you, and we're going to have the opportunity to hear more from President Paul Helfrich later today, so I will keep this brief. But what an accomplishment to be proud of. The Dayton Performing Arts Alliance is the result of a merger between the Dayton Philharmonic, the Dayton Opera, and the Dayton Ballet. All three organizations were concerned about the long-term financial viability in the wake of the economic downturn and were making major cuts to programs and staff. Interestingly, while the initial catalyst for the merger talks was financial, they quickly saw the artistic benefits of a single entity as well. They were able to adopt an integrated model of performance popular in Europe that incorporates dance, opera, and orchestra, making them the first US-based company to do so. And their merger proved to be a strategy for strengthening rather than simply saving arts offerings in the community. I love Paul Helfrich's quote about the power of possibility in this case. He says, "We realized the key point wasn't how the merger looked in comparison to the status quo or the way things used to be, but rather how the merger looked compared to where we might be in 5 years if we didn't take such a bold and progressive step. We're better served working together than competing against one another." Closing the doors, executive transition, innovation and scale, adapting to change. Could your organization be in one of these key moments? What questions are the gifts that you will bring to your nonprofit's mission and core purpose in the face of change? Ann Wallstead, our president and CEO, recently shared many of these stories at our biennial conference in Seattle earlier in October. I'll leave you, before we turn our attention to questions and answers, with her final quote. "Our strength as individuals and as organizations comes from our ability to be flexible and adaptable, to bend and change while keeping our roots firmly planted. At the organizational level, I firmly believe there is no strength in rigidly defined plans, business models that are inflexible, or any other ways of operating that relies on a static or a stable environment. Indeed, we are only as strong as our ability to change." Thank you for your time this morning. We have a good deal of time available for your questions and answers this morning, and I would like to propose that we dive right into those. You also have the opportunity, if you would like, to use some of these discussion guides as conversation starters at your table. So let me walk you through what you have available. Many of you have already found the PowerPoint slides, which were available at the bottom, third from the bottom of your stack. You also have an example of the full discussion guide, which is one that encompasses all of the moments you heard me discussing just now, and the Adapting to Change discussion guide, of course, in keeping with our theme for the conference and the Take 5 session today. As I mentioned in the keynote speech, there are a series of discussion guides that parallel each of the key moments that we looked at together this morning. And again, downloadable PowerPoint presentations that you have full access to, Creative Commons, all the permission you'd like to edit those and use those in your boardrooms and your strategy meetings, whatever the case may be. So I'm going to propose that we exhaust whatever questions and answers you may want to use, and then we can, depending on how much time is remaining, take a look at some of the resources and materials together as well, which I think may be a fruitful use of our time. I am going to turn my attention to my Brady Ware colleagues and just say that I know there are question and answer sheets on people's tables. Are those for another time, Bob, or are folks free to use those now?
They're free to use them now.
Okay.
I think in the spirit of collaboration, it would be nice if we take questions from the floor. I've always found if you have a question, chances are 8 other people are doing that being answer the question.
Great. So if you couldn't hear that, Bob's saying let's take questions from the floor, which I fully agree with. If for some reason or another you have a question you'd like to remain anonymous, by all means, feel free to write it out, and we can make sure to scramble those and maintain your anonymity, so you have both options as well. What questions has our conversation thus far prompted for you, or comments? And please, if you don't mind, I'd like to get to know you a little bit over the course of the day, so if you don't mind stating your name and your organization. I think, again, in the spirit of collaboration, that's a great way for us to proceed with the discussion. Yes?
Hi, I'm Amber Rose. I'm with the Hate Performing Arts Alliance.
Hi,
So,
Amber.
my question for you, you talked about board members asking tough questions. We all probably have that board member where you see them raise their hand and people start ducking. Because how do we continue to empower them to ask questions that are kind of in the right direction instead of just asking questions because they feel like there's a pause and they need to ask a question?
Great comment from Amber, and I'm going to do another little housekeeping item. I will repeat the questions because I'm not sure how well people can hear throughout the room. I'm also going to ask maybe some of my Brady Ware colleagues if we want to run the mic around, that might be helpful as well. Thank you, Karen. So the question was, hey, we all have that board member who jumps into any dead space with a question. We know that not all questions are equal, otherwise the Right Question Institute wouldn't exist. Our current vice chair, who's about to ascend to chair, said, look, the question that said, have you considered seeing a therapist, or have you considered, show me 17 feasibility studies ad nauseum, may not necessarily be an open and honest question. So how do we create a culture of inquiry in our boardrooms that encourage the kinds of questions that get us to good strategic thinking? And I have a number of strategies that I might list here for you because in the words of Mark Kramer, there may not be silver bullet in this case, but there might be silver buckshot. So being able to mix and blend strategies, I think, is in many ways the way to go. Honestly, the kinds of thinkers you have in the boardroom begins from square one with board development and recruitment. And so to whatever degree you may have provided maturity, thoughtfulness, updates to everything from your board member job descriptions all the way to your bylaws, that provides the kind of environment where the strategic thinkers that you want in your boardroom know that you take governance seriously. And you then make yourself known as the board of choice for folks to serve on in your communities. So I would say this starts right from the front door in terms of who you have recruited to your boardroom. Moving ahead, kind of in snapshots in time, we know we got to dance with the ones that rung us. So looking at your current boardrooms, there are a wealth of strategies you can use from a meeting management perspective. I recently did a presentation with the vice president of our department in the Southeast, and we requested 3 months worth of meeting minutes for 60 organizations. So you do the math. We were scouring through lots of meeting minutes and agendas. I would say out of all of that review, I read every single one of them, one organization did not follow the, I would submit to you for your consideration, unhelpful meeting agenda strategy of welcome, old business, new business, committee reports. Every single one of those meeting agendas look that way. And the beautiful thing is we have the freedom to structure our meetings in creative and thoughtful ways. Having guest speakers, starting with a mission moment where a client that you serve or a board member that you work with shares something where he or she has seen the mission in action within the last month. Breaking up into small groups during a board meeting. It may feel a little countercultural or even frightening to certain chairs that are extremely proud of beginning and ending on time, but there are a lot of ways to honor folks' volunteer time while still creating meaty, thoughtful and, in my opinion, volunteer honoring ways of having good strategic conversations in the boardroom. Another meeting agenda strategy I might suggest is when there are strategy discussions, I often see them at the end of the agenda. Bump them up to the beginning, because if we run out of time, that conversation that turns board members' lights on the best and that they're the most excited to get to gets bumped down the road to next month or next quarter, and it becomes incredibly demoralizing and sends probably a signal that we don't want to send to board members. So those are a number of strategies as well. The last thing I would mention is just being thoughtful about officer succession planning. If you don't already have a pipeline where you are being very intentional about who is going to be the next vice chair and the next chair, if in fact that's the way that you've got your succession set up, a strong chair can take an organization, put winds in its sails, and really create the environment for a culture of inquiry in the boardroom. On the flip side, a chair that's unprepared for the role, or was just the last person to step back in the lineup when we were sort of raising our hands about who we're doing, can really make or break the conversation. So those are a number of interrelated strategies I would like to share. Thank you, Amber, for your excellent question. Others? Yes, and wait, if you don't mind waiting for the mic. Thank you. Thanks, Mary. I appreciate your help.
Thank you. Hold on. Well, I can speak pretty loud.
I'll repeat as well, just in case. I just don't know what our audio is like.
My name is Jalen Rowe, and I'm the interim director of Community Empowerment Organization. Thank you. And I've also taken over Wally's position with SCORE, and I teach the strategic planning workshop at our SCORE conferences, our nonprofit SCORE conferences. I just wanted to say, it's a comment, not a question, but if I remember paraphrasing, you had said something that I think is very important, is to use your strategy to make it a part of your daily practices. A lot of times people think that it just has to be the strategic plan and you just, you go from that, you sit it on the shelf and you move forward with it in a very pragmatic situation. But when you said use the strategy daily, I think is so very important, especially with nonprofits.
Thank you for that reflection, and I'll just take that opportunity as others are generating their questions to sort of reflect that you may notice that most of the moments that I listed when we looked at those moments together on the PowerPoint slides are things that sometimes happen to nonprofits. That innovation and scale sometimes can be proactive, but sometimes can be reactive based on an opportunity. But that moment of strategy and planning was very intentional. And when we came together with our content partners who are subject matter experts in strategic alliances and restructuring, they said, it is a best practice to constantly be scanning your environment for partners, because there may be a moment that our organization is in, but if there's not a moment that our organization is in, there may be a moment that another organization is in within the community that might make for a fruitful strategic alliance, restructuring, or partnership. And so they really guided us well to make sure that those moments were organic and truthful to the life cycle of nonprofits, but that best practice of constantly scanning your environment for potential partners and thinking about your operating environment was one of the strategic moments. So thank you. Great. We have one in the back here.
My name is Mike. I'm with NAMI in Montgomery County. In the funding process, how do you overcome the stovepipe mentality of most organizations never wanting to give up a wing or work with anybody because they're afraid of their funding?
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the question because I know the audio was going in and out. How do you eliminate, and forgive me, Mike, if the paraphrase isn't perfect, how do you eliminate the stovepipe mentality of one organization or another competing for funding? I'll be honest with you, I do not have a canned 4-sentence answer to that. I think you've hit a nerve of something that's a real dynamic that nonprofits must wrestle with every day. But how I will respond is to be even more honest and as sort of laid bare as I know how to be. I've been in a lot of rooms with funders who fund nonprofit collaboration, and most recently, you heard from the PPV closing its doors. That president, Nadia Shmarmovian, now runs something called the Repositioning Fund in Philadelphia, and there's a cropping up of some funder collaboratives to help fund nonprofit collaboration, but also what I find to be even more heartening than that is that, and you'll see this right here on the Power of Possibility webpage, we've learned some things, and we know that a funder incentivized, or if I forgive the term, a funder sort of mandated collaboration, that glue money doesn't hang around very often. When the glue money runs out, the glue runs out. And so one of the things that's a phase 2 of this campaign, right now you'll see some frequently asked questions on the funders tab, where we've sort of taken the voice of other funders who've said, look, good collaborations don't happen unless they're nonprofit driven, they don't happen in the absence of trust, they don't happen overnight. So there's some things we know about the fact that this is not quick work. And phase 2 of the campaign will be to augment that frequently asked questions piece to really have something more along the lines of a white paper or some meaty commentary from other funders that have said, here's how we honor nonprofits' real-life experiences when we invest in these kinds of collaborations. Many foundations split up their funding into kind of tripartite arrangements so that you can they'll fund the exploration regardless of the outcome. We may or may not be suited for merger. We may or may not be suited for joint programming. And so the funding is right-sized to fit the type of collaboration exploration that organizations are funding. So again, not one easy solution, but some themes and some heartening lessons learned from the funding community. Great question. Other questions or comments?
Talk about your experience with what's happening around the country with United Ways and their drive for more nonprofit collaboration and their funding and outcomes and how that's working. We're certainly all facing that here in Dayton as our United Way has taken that direction and is actually working collaborative with Montgomery County for human service levy funding. So this is kind of human service specific. But are you seeing positive results, so-so results, any results?
Okay, and I'll repeat that. Thank you for giving me a wide lane within which to answer your question. I'll repeat the question. Talk a little bit about the experiences of United Ways, encouraging collaborations in their local communities. What results are you not seeing? I'll be very honest, that hasn't been a large part of our consulting practice, so I hesitate to speak on behalf of United Ways or community-specific examples of what I am seeing. But what I would say is that, just speaking much more generically about funder-driven collaboration efforts and some of the best practices that we're learning, I named a few just a second ago. The other piece is that I am hopeful that some of the power dynamics between funders and nonprofits can be, if not dissolved, softened a little bit. We've heard voices of that for years. When I worked with the finance projects, funders would always tell us, because they bring us in to do tie-off funding, it helps folks, develop sustainability plans because this grant is ending. Important investment at the end of a grant period, and yet at the same time, tricky position to be in because, again, we know sustainability planning doesn't happen overnight. But they'd say, we wish nonprofits would come to us with their pain points and their questions, and we could be true partners in this work. And while on the one hand, I find that to be a tremendously open and welcoming invitation from funders, the reality is that when you're on the other side of the coin, it just doesn't always feel that way. It doesn't always feel safe to sort of say, here's what we really need. Here's the true cost of what it takes for us to do this work. But I will say, without speaking directly to the experience of the United Way specifically, I will say that I see increasing, the volume turning up on voices sort of saying in that funder-grantee dynamic, this is not enough money to do X. It is enough money to do Y, and some grantee-driven approaches to change. So those are some kind of national themes, more broadly speaking, that I blend into the question that you asked. Yes.
Well, first off, let me ask, do we have anyone in the audience here that is a board member or affiliated with United Way of Dayton?
You need a question.
Are you affiliated with United Way of Dayton?
You've got a
Got a couple.
So I just wondered, since the question was because
Yeah.
you're looking at the board chair of the Whitewater Valley United Way. So I would be happy to answer on what we're doing in our community. But if our colleagues in the room from the Dayton United Way, is there anything you want to add to the question?
Well, I would say as far as Dayton's concerned, it's too new to speak to the results. And to be honest, I'm not sure nationally what the results have been, but I made a note to explore that for Linda.
There, right here.
So the bottom line was, I guess the mic's there now, so I don't want to take the words out of your mouth. Would you like to repeat?
Sure, I just said Dayton just started the joint application process recently and still refining the impacts, the required reporting and measurables. Therefore, we don't have results yet here in Montgomery County. And as far as elsewhere, I was going to research that for Linda.
Thank you very much. Great. And perhaps Bob would be great to listen to you as well.
And hopefully you can hear me, because those that know me know I like to talk, and I'm usually not that difficult to be heard. You're fine. I've been affiliated with United Way as a volunteer for probably 25 years. At one capacity or another, I've chaired the board in the Richmond community where I live twice. From a national level, and I believe Julie would probably agree with this, from a national level, when you think of organizations like United Way, they had a very traditional, non-creative, non-changing way of raising money. The old shop floor campaign. Well, if you look at the first change, and as Jenifer's talking about changes in the environment, one could debate funding organizations, as well as those that are receiving funds, have been slow to respond to environmental change. Manufacturing has been offshored. The traditional shop floor doesn't exist as robust as it used to. And we're now in 2017, and we're saying, gee, maybe we ought to have a strategy on how do we raise money from private individuals rather than the shop floor, and our primary donors are union workers in a manufacturing environment. Similarly, what I understand United Way is trying to do on a national level, and it ties into collaboration, is really to move from funding programs to funding impact. And the example I will give that we've done in our local community, and like Julie, it's way too early to start talking about outcomes. I mean, let's talk about kindergarten readiness. Some of you in the room may have work in child education spaces. We're gonna see the outcome of your program 20 years from now, when the kid graduates and gets a job. So we can't tell you what's going on now. You just kind of have to, I think, align and respond to the environment. In our county, we represent a two-county area. Between those living in poverty and those living in what's called the asset limited income constrained population, meaning they have a job, but if one thing goes wrong, they're candidates to fall below the poverty level. In our counties in southeast Indiana, that combined percentage is 50%. Now look around the room, that's 1 or 2 people in this room. Is an event away from complete financial instability. So what we've started to do, where the national model says education, health, in a community like that, what's the primary need? Basic necessities. Food, a place to sleep. And where it becomes sticky with the grantor, United Way has the money, who's trying to be impactful. Those receiving the funds all are doing great programs. Some of those may fit a very short strategy to improve someone's lives. Some of you, quite frankly, are looking to United Way to support birth to 5 or kindergarten readiness. So
if you're in a community with a smaller campaign, you're constantly struggling, what's the priority? And the only way I think to make this really truly stretch your dollars is if we have these basic needs, and one initiative we put together is Richmond is not short of food pantries. Every church has a food pantry. Every neighborhood has a food pantry. My Richmond colleagues in the room, we did a Day of Caring project and went down and handed out food at a food pantry. Absolutely no coordination. They don't talk to one another. Their world is their neighborhood. What we've done in United Way is to say, not we're just going to put a grant out here to tell you to work together. We went out and said the issue we're tackling this year in basic necessities and food, and if you want to apply, you first got to come to a meeting so we can all talk about what the heck is it we're trying to accomplish. You know, and we have, the funders have to really start thinking that way, and I know Paul will share his story, that a funder was fundamental in saving, in my opinion, for Boarding Arts in Dayton, Ohio. So that's really where the United Way model is at now. And I did want to follow up on your board thing. I just have to ask, because we're auditors, and we talk about this at Brady Ware. One of the things we do in an audit, if your organization is audited, is read your board minutes. And I want to tell you, in 30 years, having worked as the principal auditor of probably 100 or more nonprofit audits, I have never seen anything but a unanimous vote. Can someone tell me how that is humanly possible? I've been married 33 years. Trust me, it's not been 33 years of unanimous vote. So it's just mind-boggling. And we look at it and say, well, maybe it was low-hanging fruit and that's okay, but the way it's framed in your minutes, this was fairly strategic. And we know your board meets for an hour, and you made a large strategic decision in 5 minutes, like you said, at the end of the agenda, after all the reports. So one trick, I was on the CPA Society board in Indiana. Here's what we did at our strategic planning retreat and our board meetings. If meetings, because we only met once a quarter. If we had anything strategic to discuss, you were assigned to Team A or Team B. Your job on Team A was to develop the business case for doing this. Team B's job was to develop the business case for not doing whatever the organization or whatever that strategic item was. And when we came to the room, we debated. And I think right now, anyone who knows the CPA profession knows when it comes to competency-based education, the development of applications and tools on the net to enrich our profession. We have our national organization wanting to buy what we develop in Indiana to share with societies across the country. So I would encourage you, force the debate. It's very unnerving. You might have some board members that say, hey, this ain't for me, I don't like to talk. Well, there's always going to be caveats, so enough of that. But that one technique, I thought, this was perfect. And you know what? I don't think we ever took a unanimous vote the entire time I was on the board. And perhaps that's an issue. So, no, nothing like so far.
This is super exciting to me. We could do a whole day on deliberating differently if we had the time, and I promise I won't hijack our time, but I think that strategy is spectacular. I saw some people taking notes. A riff on that strategy that we often talk about at BoardSource is some boards designate a devil's advocate every single board meeting, and nobody knows who it is. You draw cards out of a hat before you walk in the boardroom, and it may be me one day and somebody else another day, but just to make sure that counterpoints come out in the discussion, because again, our missions deserve it. Our missions deserve thoughtful, careful consideration and debate, and I love this idea of the pro-con strategy teams. I think that's brilliant and innovative. I also, back to this idea of the really fundamentally critical role of chair, is that I've seen chairs not accept unanimous votes and say, well, either nobody read their board briefing packet, or we haven't had enough time to think about this as the deeply strategic issue that it is. So I'm actually going to table this vote, and we're going to take it again at the next meeting. So I think being proactively dissatisfied with easy answers is a great thing culture to build in your boardroom. I think I saw another hand over here. Yes? Okay, thank you so much.
That's all right, I think I'm Bob.
Okay.
I've worked with 3 different nonprofits over 35 years. One of the things that is a trend and pattern, either as an operating officer or CEO, and I say this, Joe knows this, I've kind of coined a statement that there's a business behind the mission. You've got to have a business mentality in running an operation of a nonprofit. If you forget about the business concept and the real world aspects, potentially your nonprofit will fail. So that's an important piece. My concern over 30-some years is working with the board, and they do represent the community at large, which is great for us, but we always tend to spend a lot of time in the board meeting focusing on the finances. And that's just a natural, I've seen it too many times. I've seen meetings last 2 hours, and an hour and 45 minutes is focused on financial issues and a lot of debate around it. And trying to draw them out of that into the mission-driven aspect. And so we've done a lot of things like, bringing good news or information and videos and try to bring them back into what we're here for. But it's tough getting board members because we have bankers and lawyers and they all want to talk. The bottom line matters. So that's one question: is how do you get that board more engaged in the activities of what your mission's about, and being engaged in the activities that are happening each day, as opposed to just coming into a board meeting and bottom line management. And then obviously the second is the recruitment and getting board members. It's tough. Everybody competes with time and try to attract new board members to an organization that really can make a difference. So those kind of it's board management and productivity.
Wonderful, wonderful points. I will share another free resource with all of you. Some of you may have been relying on this research for years, but every 2 to 3 years we come out with an index of board practices called Leading with Intent. You can download this for free from our website. It's publicly available. And to your point, which just provides additional buttressing and validation of this experience of sort of how do we make sure that board members have sufficient knowledge and programs to be strategic. Sometimes board members come up into that role from volunteering or perhaps even being staff within the organization, and they've got intimate knowledge of the organization that way. That happens, but that's not always the case. And so, and that brings its own advantages and disadvantages. But in our most recent Leading with Intent study, which just came out in early September, so it's pretty much still hot off the presses in my opinion, we found that something along the line, and that sample size, it's a convenience sample, that for those of you that are data and numbers people, it's a little bit north of 1,000 respondents, both chief executives and board chairs. And our respondents, to the tune of about 30% of them, said, no, board members don't have enough knowledge of the organization's programs and activities to be able to provide that strategic direction and oversight. And so I realize I'm validating the premise of your question rather than answering it, but I promise I'll come back around in a second. We do find that board members sometimes want to gravitate towards those financial oversight or oversight roles. They're carved out in a kind of explicit way. They're linear. They feel approachable. And my personal take on this is like anything, board members want to do a good job. So in a vacuum, they will find something to focus on that's their area of comfort. And it's our job, whether we are a staff liaison to the board, or we're the board chair, or we're the chief executive, it's our job. I really believe in preparing those meetings just like Brady Ware prepared for this event today. Every single meeting is where governance happens, whether you meet 12 times a year, or 10, or 2, or 4. And people will focus their attention where we invite them to go, and you're already using a lot of good strategies with guest speakers, and I'm going to use the term mission moment, but that was the flavor of what I heard you talking about. But in the perfect scenario, I would say there's 2 really strong tools you can use to help calibrate the way board members lean into mission and lean into their deepest understanding of programs. One is having a really fruitful, authentic, and honest relationship between the chief executive and the board chair. And I mean real. I mean, maybe they check in by phone once a week, maybe they check in by phone more often than that. Our current board chair has promised Ann Walstead that he will respond to every single email she writes him within 2 hours. Because chief executives in busy environments sometimes can't move forward without the blessing and approval of the board. Now that's not always the case, but sometimes it is. And so that's the way they've calibrated their relationship. I'm not saying that's best practice, but what I am saying is unpacking the nature of the relationship between your CEO and your board chair is something worth doing, and carving out that planning time to just say, how would you like to communicate? How are we seeing things working in the boardroom? What's not working in the boardroom? I know too many chief executives, and I've done it myself, so there's no judgment here, who sort of prepare really thoughtful board meeting agendas and then just hand it over to their chair, and he or she just kind of trots through the bullet points. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about two leaders bringing the strength of their relationship, one who's got the assets of the on-the-ground operations and the other who's got the expertise and the benefits of perspective and is not into the day-to-day operations, preparing together on behalf of engaging a full board. So that strong board chair CEO relationship, I can't underline enough. The other strategy, and I'd be interested to know in this room who has them, is a governance committee. Used to be called a nominating committee or a board development committee, but what I'm really talking about here is a group that not only looks for other candidates, but also supports what I'll call the care and feeding of the board. So in that case, this committee is a standing committee that is charged with board education, is charged with board self-assessment. There's tons and tons of board self-assessment tools out there, many of them free. We've got a tool, ours is not. I'm not here to sell you anything, but I will say if you're not assessing the performance of your board and giving folks a reliable, trustworthy, anonymous way to say, hey, our meetings are too long, or we do run out of time to talk about strategy issues every month, then we don't have enough data to act upon. And if we are serious about evaluating the performance of the CEO and setting his or her compensation, the board should model that behavior by evaluating their own performance as well. So we've seen an evolution from a short-term nominating committee looking for talent, sometimes admittedly just looking for warm bodies. How can we get out of that habit? How can we be intentional about building the board year-round? And I'll give you one example. Even with the finances, even when we've got bankers on the board, sometimes we talk in code, and I mean, look, we're bringing all the best of our human skill sets into the boardroom, but some of our human frailties as well. And we don't want to look stupid. We don't want to look like we don't know or understand anything. And so personally, I'm a little afraid of a board that votes unanimously or turns an eye away from the detail work that the Finance Committee or other committees have done and just says, we trust them, they're the experts. Truth is, that governance role legally accrues to the full board, and so boards that are serious about year-round education have done things using their governance committee and using the results of their board self-assessment to provide trainings for their board members. And I know one board who the treasurer does a 2-hour nonprofit financial literacy training every single fall as a part of their onboarding process. So that's just one example of making it a safe place for us to ask those questions and equipping people with ways to engage meaningfully, as opposed to sort of gravitating towards our comfort zones, which is what will happen unless there's some thoughtful intentionality about where we're sort of focusing their attention. So I feel like I spent most, if not all, of the time on your first question. Your second question was about recruitment. Would you mind repeating the angle or the
It's just
nuance?
tough to find a good mix of board members, but that want to be at the meetings.
Yep.
Right? We've got a board member that is absent, policy and board, you have to be in so many meetings, but just trying to find enough valuable board members who really truly want to invest time to make a change or make invest their time to improve our quality as an organization. So numbers is a big issue all the time for us.
Okay, so recruitment strategies, and I do recall you saying this idea of sort of competing for a talented volunteer's time. So one again, completely free resource on the BoardSource webpage is a board recruitment center. And this has everything from soup to nuts for if you'd like to serve on a board or if you're searching for board members. It's got a list of national board matching programs and a list of regional board matching programs, state by state. I can't quote you off the top of my head what we may or may not have on there for Ohio, but I'd be happy to look into that. We are seeing more and more folks think about ways to intentionally get outside of their circles of influence. There's nothing wrong with sort of saying, I know Bob, he's a fantastic board member, he will come, he will prepare, but at the same time, if we're only recruiting from our circles of influence, we miss out, again, on this culture of inquiry, this really rich debate that ultimately benefits our mission. So LinkedIn has actually innovated, and Bridgespan has as well, around board matching programs. And you can go on those portals and look for a board member the exact same way you would search for a paid position. So those are a couple of strategies. I do think, if I'm honest, it's not only about the finding, but it's about the keeping and the curating. So the things that you're already doing, I applaud you with the videos and the mission moments. That is attractive to board members and really using their time well and engaging them. Bob, you had something to add?
Yes. I don't know your board or anything, but one thing I found that works for a lot of organizations, and I know my colleagues have commented on this before too, is some of the best functioning boards we see have a very purposeful and deep committee structure, and intentionally they may have, like your finance committee. Your finance committee might have one board member on it, but the real key is to go out and get 4 other board members from the community at large, or 4 committee members, and then ask them to serve terms, provide them education about the mission, and then if they're carrying out committee work, this becomes the most fertile ground for you to recruit board members that are going to come to the table with knowledge of the organization and its mission, and passion for doing work, at the board level. The problem is you bring people in from the outside that have no knowledge necessarily of the mission, but they're a banker or a good accountant. And we decided we need an accountant, and they're comfortable. The only thing they know to ask about is the numbers. So we're big believers, I think, as a group, in don't sell yourself short in really having a robust committee structure. And please I always say, please get outside your own gene pool on who you make committee assignments with, because that's going to be the easiest way to, identify your future board leaders.
Can I ask one follow-up question and I'll reply? Our company is over a 5-county area. So management, off-site management, regional management, or just regional aspects of representation in general communities, and trying to get board membership that is representation of a large geographical area, I find is very difficult. So we tend to have our board members pretty much our center where our office is at, and they're pretty nearby. Travel is an issue. So with that thought, what's your thought about really looking at technology and having on-screen or dial-in or conference call? One, permissible, not a problem, ongoing for board leadership, and from a legal standpoint, having someone on the phone and making votes and engaged in the, because if I want somebody from Cincinnati, Ohio, a lot of the turn off time is trying to recruit from our geographic area that we represent is just time is the essence. I can't drive 2 hours to be at your board meeting at 6 o'clock in the evening. Just can't do it. Technology would help solve a lot of those issues. So is that something a lot of people are going to?
Yeah, so the question is about regional representation and being able to attend meetings virtually as a way to address geographic challenges and travel challenges. So there's a number of things embedded in your question. All of them are very rich and good, and I think to Bob's point, probably others may have that same question or similar threads. I can't stand here and quote you Ohio state law. You may be incorporated in another state, but most states do allow for the provision of virtual meetings as long as board members can simultaneously hear and listen to one another. So that is a key provision of being able to have a legal virtual meeting. At BoardSource, we just came out with a book called Virtual Meetings. It's kind of soup to nuts on how to stage and craft them well. One thing that we find is depending on people's love or hatred or familiarity with technology, if they're a digital native or not, that can really become a tripwire for folks. And all of that good thinking that we just talked about in terms of crafting wonderful meeting agendas can go out the window if somebody's just, where's Skype, where's Zoom, how do I work this bugger? So, I think not giving it short shrift that, hey, this is a change, we recognize it's a change, it's for everyone's convenience, it's because we want authentic participation. No, we're not going to do it in the middle of the day while you're on your lunch break at work because we know you're going to be multitasking. Whatever the case may be, being very thoughtful and intentional that if we're switching to one or more virtual meetings per year, we're bringing everyone along with us, and we're providing them the time, the training, and the kind of human care and feeding, if you will, to make sure that they are successful in participating in those meetings fully and completely. One other kind of anecdotal piece is a colleague of mine, one of the consultants we work really closely with, did a study of virtual meetings in his own network. It was a statewide network in Indiana. And he said one of the things they found when they moved to virtual meetings was that it didn't reduce the quality of their interactions to use more virtual meetings, but it was incredibly important to have at least one in-person meeting per year, that there's nothing that they found they could do to substitute for the human connection and the trust building that happens with at least being face-to-face that often. Great question. Other thoughts or questions or comments? Yes.
I'm Kevin McDonald with Keep Private Banks. I'm one of those bankers you're talking about.
Thank you.
And so,
You're about to get recruited.
and I'm on 2 boards that I'll talk about today. One, Dayton Children's Hospital Foundation, and then the other extreme is Dayton Contemporary Dance Company. So one is a lot of financial wealth, and the other is probably the other extreme. So my question is, especially on the bigger boards with more money, the boards are lifting the minimums of what a board member should contribute, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on strengths and weaknesses of having that kind of a requirement.
Interesting. Okay, so this is about board giving policy and what board members are required to contribute. I'll kind of take a step back and then get back to the center and the heart of your question. Some boards have no giving policy at all. Some boards have a giving policy that's a set minimum. You have to give $1,000 per year or $5,000 per year. The sky's the limit. And some boards have a proportional giving policy that says our mission, our organization will be within the top 3 of your giving priorities, because most folks definitely give to their alma mater, their church, so whatever nonprofit you may serve on wants to sort of assure that they're within the top 3 of your giving priorities. So there's different ways to craft those board giving policies in the first place. Our take on this at BoardSource, and my personal take, is that having 100% board member giving of some kind is vitally important. And having been a chief executive officer myself, I'm just going to be transparent with you, you do want to be able to do 2 things. One, in those foundation and grant making and responses to RFPs, to say we've got 100% board member giving, we know all this. But 2, if you're engaging your board members, and this is a little bit more of a sticky wicket, because there's a lot of approaches that different nonprofits within the subsector have to this, but if you're engaging board members in fundraising in any way at all, and I don't just mean asking board members to make direct asks, I mean them board members being ambassadors in all kinds of other ways. There's a credibility issue there if a board member is asking for funds from a corporation or from another entity and they themselves are not giving. Now, more to the heart of your question, what about lowering minimum giving levels? I don't have a firm stance on that one way or the other, but I do think that I would commend you to one of our other campaigns, which is called Measuring Fundraising Effectiveness, which is a simple equation that basically helps nonprofits to think about how many funding sources are you reliant on, what percentage do your top 5 funding sources contribute to your bottom line, and then what's the lift in getting revenue from those top 5 sources. Because you can imagine, it could be very cheap if I get all of my money from state Department of Health, not to pick on State Department of Health, but a government entity. If I get 98% of my government entity, my revenue every year from a government entity, that's relatively inexpensive. I'm not out there cultivating individual donor relationships with each one of you in this room, but now I'm highly dependent on this one source. So it's not only about revenue mix writ large, but it's also about the expense and the time it takes to do the revenue mix. And so that's the framing I would bring to this idea of sort of, okay, if we lower board member minimums, how does that change our overall giving picture, and what's the overall impact of our bottom line and who we're reliant on? So, yeah.
Jennifer, with Community Empowerment Organization, we help communities build capacity. A lot of the programs are necessity-based programs, and we want to make sure that we have a representative from those communities on our board. But there is no way that they could be a financial giver in that case. But their input is just incredible, what they give as far as knowledge and what's really needed. How do you address that?
So the question is about being a charity that addresses real issues in community of need and having community members serve on the board who do not have financial means to give. And I have a couple of thoughts about that. I think that's why I'm in favor of some of those more flexible board giving policies that say, I gave you the top 3 example, another one of them might say, each board member will give according to an amount that's personally meaningful for them. For some people that might be a nickel. But so you can create a flexible giving policy that is inclusive of every board member's financial needs. I'm not going to take a stance on this one way or another, just to share practices I've seen happen throughout the sector. I've seen board members give on behalf of other board members so that their donation gets counted. But I do think there's a larger issue here of inclusivity in boardrooms. And with some of the most depressing findings, our #1 finding from Leading with Intent this year, and this is about racial diversity and ethnic diversity as opposed to kind of financial means, is that boards look the exact same as they did in 1994, and that a vast majority of boards are not diverse, and about 30% are entirely white nationwide. And I don't mean to sort of open up a whole other topic as we're sort of heading into the break, but I do think whether it's about issues of limited financial means, other forms of diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, age diversity, inclusion really matters. And there are lots of groups that have said to me, we know we need community representation. How do we just go out and find this person? And the intentions are really well placed, but the execution might have really deleterious effects. And so we sort of kind of think of this first do no harm mentality, that when you're diversifying your board across any number of sectors or demographic modifiers, if you will, demographic ideas, that you recruit the person based on, as you said, their ideas, what they bring to the table, who they are as a human being, their values, their ability to serve, and that often you bring on 2 or more people who fit some of those demographic characteristics, because being the single person who is of limited financial means, or the single person who's under 30, is a really, really difficult role for a board member to play, and positions them sometimes very unintentionally as having to speak on behalf of their demographic. So those are a couple of thoughts that I have. Yeah. I see we've got 10 minutes before we break.
Hello, I'm Dory Watts with Culture Works, and my question is going to sort of go along with the same theme, and that is about recruiting millennials to your board. A lot of that is issue with board giving limits and those kinds of things. Obviously, it's really important, but I know from discussions we've had with millennial groups and things like that, that often they're interested, they feel overwhelmed, they feel weird coming into these groups of what you said, have been the same boards for years, these older attorneys, older bankers, that kind of thing. So I guess some strategies for that I'd be interested in.
Absolutely. There's been some really good work on engaging millennials in all kinds of leadership roles, including board governance recently. I am blanking on some of the exact reports, but we should exchange business cards later, and I will send them to you. I think some of the larger principles of inclusivity is important. I do think the nature of board service is changing somewhat. I'm not going to sort of categorically say across the nation that every board we've surveyed in Leading with Intent is changing up their practices, but things like moving to more virtual meetings, moving to shorter meetings, just thinking about the daily commitments of the people that you want to attract to your board. Is it practical and realistic for them to be able to attend, whether that means parking and childcare or meeting at night or meeting on the weekends? So being very thoughtful about what works and what doesn't work for everyone you're asking to serve, including millennials. And I think the same holds true. I'm going to go deeper into a point that I made earlier, which is doing our homework and doing some of that cultivation. I think the strategy that Bob mentioned earlier of asking folks to serve on a committee as a non-board member is a great way to date before you get married. Fabulous way to do that. And if you're successful with that, it's a little bit of a lower stakes commitment for somebody in a millennial generation. You don't have to fully be on the board yet, but you get to sort of see what the mission and the organization is about. If you're successful with that strategy, let them tell you. Ask relentlessly as many questions as you can of the folks that you are engaged with, whether they be donors, folks that participate in your services, folks that you are successful with, ask them to do committee service or whatever the case may be. I think a final strategy I see people using that so far I've heard mixed results on is this idea of having a junior board. It's a little bit of a lightning rod. Some folks really feel like that is putting younger people in a backseat position and not giving them real positions of authority. But that said, I'm not going to strike that option off the table entirely because I have seen some organizations that have crafted real roles, true authority, authentic relationships, and again created a pipeline of leaderships by having a junior board. So I guess my headline there is if you're going to do it thoughtfully. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I think everyone in the room knows millennials. I'm the father of two of them. They can act differently than I do at 60 years old. The one practice that I've seen a lot in my board service, whether you have a formal governance committee or the executive committee of doing board recruitment, we all start with what I think is the worst question in the world. Who do you know that might be a good board member? I'm a clean talker. I'm a 60-year-old white guy. I live in a certain area of town, and we all have our community that we live in. So what's the likelihood, if we're all honest here, that I'm not going to come back with 3 or 4 names of other people who look just like me? So if you're going to have the governance committee, we did this with our local United Way board, we stopped asking going into the new fiscal year, if you know somebody that would be a good board member, email us their contact information. We went back to the old-fashioned board matrix, and we said, we need an attorney, and we want a millennial. All right, I don't care, the yellow pages, word of mouth, or whatever, let's get a list of all the 30 to 40-year-old attorneys in Richmond, Indiana, and we'll reach out and talk to them, and talk to them about our mission. And if you're really wanting to make the change, and we've made some progress, not by no means a home run, but we went about it very, very personal, purposeful, that we were recruiting a skill set, a demographic, and I think over the course of the next couple of recruitment cycles, we will break the old tradition of everybody in Wayne County on the United Way board. It was like you have to show your AARP card. I mean, that's what we look like. And it's human nature. Nobody does it with malice or ill intent. But we see boards all the time that we work with that say the same thing. We throw up our hands in despair and say we can't recruit. Yeah, you can. You're just going to have to recruit a different way. If you're going to want to keep doing the same thing you've always done, I'll tell you now, you'll be in the same spot 10 years from now. But if you go about and use that matrix, and we all are accustomed, does everybody know what I'm talking about? You need an accountant, you need a banker, you need an insurance person. Now what we have to do is to say, okay, I have a matrix of what I need in skill sets. Now I have to have a matrix saying what I want my board to look like, connect the dots, and then let's go out and talk directly to them. Or like your example, if you want someone on the board that has knowledge of the community, another way to do that is to see if you can't form maybe a strategic programming kind of community and invite the people you're trying to serve to the conversation, because maybe that might be a way to make better and more informed programming decisions. Rather than going to, like we did this at United Way, rather than working with just the agency to be funded, we went out to the community and said, maybe we ought to take a pulse here and talk to the people that are in the 50% that are in trouble and just ask them, if we could do anything for you, what would you want us to do? And it seems so simple, but we get in the boardroom and we fall victim to all these legacy practices, and we just can't seem to get our way out of it. So, sorry.
Two things that I can't help but double back on, just to reemphasize and try to like, that if you are using that board matrix where you sort of see, okay, our board composition is great in these 5 areas, but we've got gaps in these 3, just the fundamental importance, and Bob said this, but to me it can't be emphasized enough, the fundamental importance that if you say we need a millennial, we don't just need a millennial, we need a millennial with these skill sets, with this background and experience, to help us round out our board composition this way. That way you're recruiting the human, not the demographic, right? And if we are going and making invitations to people based on the demographic, but nothing else, those conversations are going to be hollow, they're not the leadership we want to put out into the world. The other thing Bob said that I think is tremendously important is that certainly we're going to be cultivating relationships all the time in sort of that retail way, but this wholesale idea of having strategic conversations with clients, stakeholders, and partners, setting up advisory councils. I'm not a fan of setting them up just for the sake of setting them up. They take a lot of work to support, so I'm not saying just set up an advisory council for the sake of recruitment, but you could have a one-off strategy session where you really are inviting your community's thinkers and leaders, and it's a twofold scenario. It's a one-time event. All this group of people needs to commit to you is 2 hours of their day or 3 hours of their day. You've teed up a strategic question or a set of strategic questions for them. They're not on your board. Maybe they're donors, maybe they're not. Maybe they're recipients of services, maybe they're not. But you bring them into the room to get strategy advice from them, and it's a twofer. You're also watching how people interact and seeing how they engage and seeing if, could there be some potential board members in this room? And you're getting outside of those sort of siloed relationships or circles of influence. So another strategy to think about is you build out those community relationships and potential board members.
I think we have time for one more question.
It's more informational than a question. So I'm Brian Connolly, I'm with Brady Ware. And about 3 years ago, Big Brothers Big Sisters in Dayton, they set up an associate board. So I was one of the very first members on that. It took us about 2 years to rebuild that and find our purpose of what are we really doing. We haven't met any board members yet. Is this really just a kids' table that we're just saying, oh, we're part of the Big Sisters? So finally we found our feet, and we do the events committee and the recruiting committee, and we opened up a liaison position that the person would attend both board and the associate meeting, opened up some communication, and we now meet regularly with the board, just an after-hour drinks with them, maybe every second or third month, drinking with them. We're constantly interacting with the board, and now we're going further now where our committees are opening our doors to people that don't have the time to commit to a board, but want to get involved in the committee. So their feet are still to come on. So that took us about 3 years to get to that point. I think we've kind of set it up so that we're constantly going to have a flow of people.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing your experience. We promise not to treat you as like a representation of everyone who's ever served on an associate board. Right.
Yeah, Paul Helford from the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance. Just with the whole question of board recruitment, I wanted to, I think the real answer is it's almost a hybrid, because a matrix alone is not the answer. You got to take maybe the best part of what the old approach was, which is not just who do you know, what you should be thinking about when you think who do you know is who am I aware of that's passionate about the organization. And the thing is, there are probably lots of people who are passionate about the organization that you don't know. So when you use the matrix, it can't just be, well, who's a good accountant or who's a CFO? It's got to be, who's an accountant or a CFO that we know cares about this organization, or maybe we think might care. Because this comes up all the time. You know, someone will say, well, this person would be a great board member. Well, has anybody ever seen them at a performance? No. Well, do they have tickets? No. Have they ever made a donation? No. Chances are that's not going to be a good board member. So, you know, you have to kind of meld the two things. And the other thing I just wanted to make was an observation on the remote participation. I have frequently in the course of the year been really humbled by board members who are traveling, they're on vacation, and they take the time to participate in a meeting, and, you know, always happy to facilitate that. I've also served organizations that, you know, had a mandate that they had to have statewide representation. So obviously having a capability to participate remotely was, you know, a necessity. Other than that, I would discourage it, because here's the, you know, I just say, what's the metaphor we use when somebody's not really engaged? You know, like if we have a soloist of the orchestra who's having an off night, we say, well, they phoned it in, you know? And the other thing we say is when somebody's really engaged in something, they say they are at the table. And so there's, you know, I've never seen anyone effectively lead a meeting over the phone, because they can't read the body language, they're not seeing what's happening in the room. And, you know, we're all busy, and I think when people know they're not really visible, that's when you get the multitasking, and, you know, they put it on mute, and then the people in the meeting feel like, well, we gotta, you know, are you still there, Bob? And that kind of stuff. So, again, I really think that as wonderful as technology is for really significant discussions, you gotta encourage people to be there.
Yes.
Okay. On that note, thank you. We have some.
Jenifer's going to be here for the rest of the morning and through lunch, so if you have questions, I would encourage you to approach her on the break, give her your business card. Again, just a Brady Ware comment about BoardSource. If you've not checked out their resources, you really should. They have put together a wealth of tools to deal with board recruitment governance, effective meetings, just all the things that Jenifer said, all the questions and some of the struggles that you all have identified. So there's tools out there, and they're very good tools, so we would highly recommend them. We would ask during the break, where's Kara? Kara's already went outside. See, Kara really runs the show, don't let anybody fool you. But we're going to take a break, a 15-minute break, and what they're going to do is the hotel staff is going to come in and reset the room, because they'll put the divider in place. So as you go out, you know, grab something to drink on your way out the door, and our folks outside will steer you to which side of the room the breakout session will be in.
Bob, Jenny provided some insight as to her breakout session. What's yours going to be about? It says social enterprise. Could you tell us a little bit about your breakout?
Well, what we're going to talk about in this change, if you will, in the strategic model, really is to talk about, does everybody in the room you know what a social enterprise is? Okay, I see a few heads nodding. Really, in this spirit of looking at alternate business models, we're really going to go through the basics of defining what is a social enterprise, what type of form could that take. We're going to share some examples, and you know, not to steal my own thunder, but what a social enterprise really is, and it can be operated in one of three business forms. Let's think, for example, does everyone in Dayton know hospice? Does everyone in Dayton know that hospice owns 2 or 3 gift shops in the city of Dayton? That's a social enterprise. What they're doing is they're engaging in a retail business activity to diversify revenue. So that's an example. Another example might be, and this one's probably a little easier, how many people know what Goodwill is? Goodwill operates, I think, as many thrift stores now as Dollar General in the Miami Valley. So that whole retail operation has a dual purpose. It provides revenue for Goodwill, and as a social enterprise, it provides employment opportunity, for the demographic or the population that Goodwill serves. So we're going to talk, Julie, about those kind of aspects, and then we found some really compelling social enterprise success stories to share. And really, all we're wanting to do is kind of get, not to get you out of the box per se. I like to say, let's blow the box up and pretend it doesn't exist. And maybe this might strike a chord or resonate with you. Down the road strategically, would a social enterprise make sense for your organization? So we'll see you back in 15 minutes. Thank you.